Welcome back to the MMA Prospectus. We are here for a non-fight week. Well, I mean, for this show, I guess every week is fight week because we're looking at all around the regional scene. But a still relative non-fight week for the MMA Prospectus, talking about UFC Ottawa and taking a spin around the regional, seeing what's out there. Tom, as always, joining me. Thank you for being here. That's a Goldberg sentence, but
oh, you can get much Goldbergier. Like,
I'm sure I can
do better than that.
I know, but it's that weird thing. Like, and I understand why he does it, because it's one of those things you do when your job is to talk all the time and you start talking to fill space, and then you have to think about what you actually are going to say after you've started talking to fill space.
Yeah.
So you just say, like, the person's name. It's like, Tom, my co-host is here, and, I'm sort of like leading myself down whatever mental path I can make up time with. Anyway, that's not to say I'm not excited you're here or that I don't know what the hell I'm doing. Please don't get that idea, because if you do, I will live down to that expectation.
Because he doesn't know what he's doing, and he doesn't give a single fuck that I'm here.
But first and foremost, I mean, I guess because we've got this kind of, I don't know, there are a lot of shows this weekend. If you're really into MMA, there's there's Bellator, there's Jungle Fight, there's Legacy,
Victory.
Thunder. There's all sorts of stuff floating around this weekend for MMA, but even by normal MMA standards, other than this Bellator Dynamite card, there's a pretty notable lack of, like, super interesting developing talent fights. Like, a lot of what I'm seeing out there is just kind of, hey, here's some guys who most of the talent we had to look at we looked at this week in prep for this show were the kind of fighters who, it's like, oh, they're in their first 3 or 4 fights and they've been crushing cans, but there's a chance that they might be talented at some point, so we should watch some tape and see, do they have the physical athletic tools to build something. So yeah, it's kind of a weird week. We've got a lot of reflecting to do, not a lot of going forward to do. Chief among those reflections is, honestly, I mean, we're going to talk a lot about Rory MacDonald on this show, but first thing I want to do is I like to always start with winners, because they're winners, and this is a sports podcast. So what are we doing if we're not talking about winners? We're not
starting as winners, Rory.
We're not running a, like, Cleveland Browns NFL cast or something where we're dedicated to talking about losers. That we don't have to be chained to that. We're not a team themed event. So I want to start out with talking about Krzysztof Jotko, because man, did he look fantastic.
Yeah, he just 59 seconds in, just absolutely timbered McCrory.
Yeah, and I mean, McCrory's always been a pretty notably tough dude, even when even when he's gotten submitted or gotten hurt in the past. I mean, he's only been submitted twice, but even when he's lost in the past, he's always been the kind of fighter that's hard to beat, really tough, really game. He's never showed signs of being chinny, and man, Jotko just nailed him right in the temple and put him down cold. And if it weren't for Jotko's last fight, I probably wouldn't give that a lot of thought. I would probably just be like, whoa, he got a weird, like, one-punch KO'd by a dude who's doing all right in the UFC. But in Jotko's last fight against Brad Scott, he really had this, like, fantastic range game plan where he was very careful about maintaining distance, mixing up strikes, and really showing a lot of development in his game. And so for him to come out the next time around and just KO somebody clean makes me really get a lot of hope that he might be a kind of a dark horse contender at middleweight.
Yeah, it's number one, the speed differential in that fight. Even the minute we saw it was really significant. McCrory looked like he was standing still compared to Jotko. And Jotko's one of those guys that, because of the size of the UFC roster, doing his developing mostly in the UFC. I mean, it's one of those things that if you ask the average person, like, how long Jotko's been in the UFC, been in there since what, 2013?
Yep.
He's spent half his career in the UFC. He's in the 6th year of his career. 3 of them have been in the UFC. 3 of them have been out of the UFC. He's done a lot of his developing in the octagon, and he just kind of gets like he's been winning. The only loss he had came in 2014, got submitted, and he's been winning. And it's just been lost in the shuffle because he's been fighting on Fight Pass a bunch. He's been fighting on the undercard. There's always a more significant fight going on. He even has a pretty decent like competition. Like when you're talking about like beating Scott Askham and Bradley Scott, like not totally garbage fighters, like pretty solid fighters for the division. It's just the nature of the beast right now that guys like Jotko just kind of get lost in the shuffle, and then when they explode onto the scene, it's big because he made, well, I don't know how much of a jump he made. He's definitely developing his power and developing his outside striking game, and that's a pattern that we've seen for at least 2 fights now. But he gets a favorable matchup, like a tandem McCrory, in one like aspect of his game, and all of a sudden it's like, holy crap, why haven't we been talking about Krzysztof Jotko? And it's like, well, because there's been a lot of other guys to talk about, and he's always been kind of like that guy to be like, oh, and Jotko got a win, and he looked fairly decent, or he got a split decision, or
Yeah, well, I mean, he's gotten a split decision with Scott Askham. Before he got to the UFC, he got a majority decision over Bojan Velishkovic and a split over Martin Zavada, both decent regional fighters. I think Velishkovic is even in the UFC right now, but maybe I'm thinking of somebody else. And so, he's gotten good wins throughout his career, but he's not always been a dominant fighter. His game has been really janky for a while, where it's just kind of like he's got these really athletic takedowns that he can hit, but he's not like an otherwise punishing wrestler or physically overwhelming wrestler. And he likes to throw all these funky strikes. He'll try back elbows and spinning back fists and all sorts of stuff like that, but he's not a technical, like, 1-2s, here's a nice 3-piece combo striker. And it's just over time, all these really athletic things that he likes to do have been slowly buttressed by the slow building of all those other basic skills that he's collecting as he's gone through his career. And now suddenly, I think with all the basics in place, you really see a lot more effect coming out of the bigger things that he's always done well.
Mm-hmm.
So it'll be interesting to see going forward. I mean, that's a big KO win. It'll probably rocket him up into another harder fight. I think he should probably be fighting somebody near the edges of the top 15 if he can, and see how far up he can go, how fast. Because at 6 years in, he should basically be getting close to being a finished product. So
yeah, and it's interesting to see that he's developing that power as he goes. Something that it happens. It definitely happens. On this card, Donald Cerrone kind of did that, where it's one of those things that people always. You think of Donald Cerrone, the striker, Donald Cerrone, the Muay Thai striker, but really early in his career, he was a submission guy. He didn't record his first TKO win until he was already in the UFC against Charles Oliveira. And then after that, it wasn't till he head kicked that guy.
Melvin Guillard.
Melvin Guillard, and then Martins came up. And then, like, it's been really recently that he's been, like, really icing people on the feet. So it's one of those things you can develop. Like, there's natural power, and then there is power that is gained through proper technique and experience, and conditioning yourself. Like, obviously strength and conditioning, and then learning how to transfer weight into your shots. And it seems like Jotko is building that building that a little bit because he's putting dudes away when in the past wasn't necessarily icing guys the way he absolutely stiffened Tandem McCrory.
Well, and a lot of that too can also be that you see guys who have the power early in their career, and they just don't know. They're not a clean enough, technical enough striker to ever hit often enough to make it matter. Like they might land a few crushing punches on somebody and hurt them, but they don't have the ability to follow up enough to actually knock people out. And so it's only later in their career when their technique starts to come together and they start to use what they've learned that suddenly it's like, okay, now I can hit you, 3 out of every 5 times I throw punches at you. And when I can do that, that power means a lot more.
Yeah.
Otherwise on this card, I was also pretty impressed by Colby Covington. I mean, he was getting a late notice replacement that was kind of a good stylistic matchup, but I realize it's a little boring, but I really like to see technical wrestlers put on clinics from Top Ride, honestly.
Yeah, to be perfectly honest, I did not see this fight and completely blanked on that fact until just now. So tell me a little bit about it. Like, so he got to kind of put on a wrestling clinic?
Yeah, I mean, Munier didn't have the technical striking to keep him at bay or the footwork to keep him at bay. So Covington was able to shoot in pretty easily, chain his takedowns, get Munier in turtle a lot or in like butterfly guard.
Mm-hmm.
And then just for most of the fight, the first 2 rounds, just kind of was able to move and, stay on top of him, spinning around him and finding angles to land punches and stuff like that and do little bits of ground and pound over a couple rounds and just stay ahead of him. And then the third, he hurt him and dropped him and then jumped on him and choked him out. So it was just a really solid, dominating performance.
Excellent. Other than that, Misha Serkinov and Oliver Mercier, they both won, and won in the fashion that we kind of expected to. But man, they had to work a lot harder for them than I thought they were going to need to in both those fights.
Yeah, I'm a lot more impressed with Serkinov, frankly, because Kudalaba fought a really smart game.
Mm-hmm.
Fought the best fight he could have. He stayed out of the pocket. He did not just sprint at Serkinov like he's done with a lot of guys in the past. He didn't just bull rush him and let himself get taken down.
Yeah.
And Kudalaba obviously hits really, really hard. Like, I think Serkinov had reason to be cautious. I mean, he got dropped. Serkinov got dropped in the first round. But I had Serkinov up 2 rounds to none in a pure striking battle after the first 2 rounds, and then he went and got the submission in the third. So in division like light heavyweight, where so often you're going to have to go through fire to get wins, I thought that was actually a pretty good performance for him to be able to outstrike Kudalaba for 2 rounds. And then
he's definitely also facing like the higher quality opposition. Like the Alban Mercier fight, just that one concerned me a little bit more than reassured me in terms of like how long it took him to find that position and to get Goatee down.
Yeah, he got hit a lot. It's one of the things too that at lightweight, it's a lot more troubling to see a good athlete struggling with somebody who, I mean, I'm not saying Gucci's a bad athlete or even a bad fighter, but who's very much just kind of chaff at the bottom of the division. Like, it's just a guy at lightweight, and there are 100 more of them. And if you're going to struggle with him, there are 99 other people who can do exactly all the same things he did.
Yeah, nope. It was one of those that watching that I felt like my stock on Mercier dropped after that fight. Like, just personally,
yeah,
just not a great showing for him. It might have been, there might be other reasons for it. So obviously, you never judge a fighter completely on one fight, but just generally speaking, not the performance he probably wanted, not the one I was really looking for from him.
Yeah. Let's see. Also worth noting on this card was the to some extent, the Joanne Calderwood fight versus Valerie Letourneau, in which Calderwood looked a lot better. It turns out that there are some extenuating circumstances around that fight, in that Letourneau, apparently her bra just broke in that fight.
Yeah.
And she not only was she adjusting it all throughout the fight, but by the time when she actually like covered up and like turned away, that was because her bra had like fallen off under her top. And so that sucks for her. That sucks for her, and it's a hard loss for her to take, especially coming off her loss to Jędrzejczyk. But it was really good to see Calderwood back fighting with confidence. Like, she still has a lot of the same problems where she'll close her eyes as she's getting hit in exchanges. Mm-hmm. And she is kind of a damage sponge.
Mm-hmm.
But she is also one of the most creative offensive fighters in that division. So seeing her like actually being willing to stand in and use that creativity and do all the things that she wanted to do, and not like actually, just sort of turn her head away when punches started incoming and things like that. That was really good to see. Also, Elias Teodoro just kind of fought a safety first fight against Sam Alvey, which is fine and whatever, and doesn't really say anything other than that Sam Alvey is incredibly foot slow and needs to do something else other than throw one punch.
Yep.
But that brings us to Rory MacDonald, who really isn't a prospect.
Not even a little.
Not even a little, for the purposes of this show. He's been fighting for over a decade now, but he's only 26, and the reason we want to talk about this is because he's one of those fighters that is routinely in commentary touted as being still the future of the sport. And it really brings up these weird, like, how little I feel like MMA progress is connected to age, first of all. And I have been shown at times to be wrong on this. Definitely there are older fighters who get into the sport late and fade away really quickly because of their age. I'm not saying that it just doesn't matter at all. And there are also young fighters who start really early and fight for like 20 years. And they're always going to be outliers. But the general truth of it is that it just seems like cage wear is a bigger problem than anything. And Rory MacDonald has a lot of it.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's one of those things that when you look at Rory MacDonald, the first thing I'd say is that he did everything right in terms of how we would talk about building a career. If you wanted to set down like how an athletically talented young person should get into the sport, he joined it fairly early. He started taking professional fights really early, which that's debatable if he made the right call. But
he won them. I mean, whether you want to say it was a good idea or not, he won all of his early pro fights.
He eased into his career. He didn't take incredibly hard fights out of the gate. He spent about 5 years from 2005 to, or it was like 2009, fighting on the regional circuit. So 4 years fighting on the regional circuit. He took a ton of fights in 2006. Then he backed off and he took one fight in 2007, one fight in 2008. When he ran into that first speed bump, when he got beat for the first time by Carlos Condit, he joined a major camp. He joined up with TriStar, so he's got the major coaching. And then he really nicely paced his fights for the rest of his career. And he's reaped benefits of that in that he's conceivably still within his prime, and he's, in the 11th year of his professional career, which is significantly past the average of 9 years, or the 9th year being the end of a fighter's prime. But I do think that there's a shift in how he has to approach the fight game, because it's pretty obvious at this point that despite the fact that he's 26, there's a ton of wear on that body. and there's a ton of damage that he's absorbed over the years. And just the fact, like, the nose issue is like, like it's a very visible, very easy to talk about, like, embodiment of that problem. And they're saying that he was getting his nose broken during camp.
Yep.
And how easily his nose was getting broken. That's going to change, like, that sort of physical degradation changes the way guys fight. And MacDonald's going to have to start leaning a little more on his experience and his technical skill than he is, like, just raw athletic talent in the future. Again, despite the fact being 26, when you kind of expect guys, you know, who are physical beasts to just go out there and beast.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of those things that, like, given time, it just always seems like something ends up going wrong for fighters. You give them enough time in the cage, something's going to break. And if you're young, with these young guys, it may not be like, oh, my knee went bad on me by 26. You know, your knees might last longer than that, unlike somebody who's 36, or it may not be your back, or it may not be all the joint injuries that older fighters start to get. Could just be something else random. Could be my nose has been pulped to the point that it no longer holds up, or you know, I broke my hand 5 times and now my hand is always hurting. Like, that was what seems to have happened with Melvin Guillard, is that he just keeps getting hand injuries along with other problems. Or it could just be, you know, traumatic brain injury, as bad as that is that you're getting concussion symptoms and all sorts of things like that just won't go away. And I don't know, it just seems like there's always some kind of problem eventually that is going to stick with a fighter, and starting early doesn't prevent that.
Yeah, it is. And I think that there are a lot of factors in what goes into the longevity of a fighter and how they develop. I think being younger, just generally being younger, means you have more time in front of you.
Yeah.
Because you can recover a little faster. Like, Roy MacDonald will bounce back from bounce back from the broken nose likely faster than a guy, 20 years older than him would.
Sure.
So there are advantages to being young. It definitely plays a factor. And I don't think he's necessarily done being an elite level fighter at this point. I think there's going to be a slight shift where he is in, like, maybe getting towards an early physical decline, but it isn't going to equal his decline as a fighter quite yet if he can adjust how he fights.
Yeah, I think it's also just there's a certain level of inconsistency to it starting young, that, like we've seen with guys like Jordan Meehan or Joe Daddy Stevenson. I don't even know how you'd want to categorize Miguel Torres, who was a picture of consistency for his career, but still was done by 30 as an elite fighter. But I think that for a lot of these guys coming up, there always ends up being something too that's just like a technical block missing in their game, where it's just, everybody, there's this idea that you can just learn forever and always progress and always get better, and something you'll always be able to develop and change and improve. And that really, I don't know. I don't see any evidence of that actually being true for anyone. Like, I see a lot of people get better in specific ways and not in others, but you tend to see a lot of people, they'll be in a sport getting better and improving and changing and working on everything for 15 years, and they will still carry the things that they did when they first started with them. They will still carry some of their earliest habits. And I think when you get started really young, especially, not to turn my nose up at Toshido Fighting Arts Academy, which has produced the really very decent Shane Campbell as well, and Sarah Morris, among others, and Matt Dwyer. But, like, these starting at these smaller camps early for a young kid, like, are they going to learn how to wrestle at an elite level really well, or are they going to learn all the basics they need for a good boxing game, or are they going to, get all of the best pieces they can starting out, and then be able to improve on them from there, or are they going to get like this really funky, weird foundation that they are constantly battling against for the rest of their career? And I think for some of these guys, maybe not MacDonald, who really did seem to be pretty technical in almost every area of the fight, but it's, random small MMA gyms out in the middle of nowhere aren't necessarily going to teach good habits, and breaking bad habits is really difficult. And for young kids, I think, or for young teenagers, I think it's especially going to be hard. It's going to be harder.
Yeah, because in the case of Rory, I feel like he made a progression that isn't uncommon for like young athletes anywhere. It came a little bit later, where he started training like in his teens, and then in his early 20s he went off to a way better coach. I mean, that's pretty much the story of like every athlete that goes into college.
It's true, but I think part of this for me is that with a lot of other sports, you're wrestling and boxing and whatever else, gymnastics, whatever else is out there, there's a pretty set basics of how the sport works.
Yes, I would agree with that. And there's a very defined system for scoring that gives people like a really finite thing to work on. Whereas MMA is so open that you can be doing a lot of things wrong or do things against the conventional wisdom grain and do very well at low levels.
Yep.
Which you see in other sports. I mean, everyone who's ever competed in a sport and gone to a higher level, you don't even have to have gone to an international level, but if you've moved from the regional level in a sport to the national level in a sport, you see that there's some dog shit things people do on the regional level that works fine there, and then when they move up a level, it just stops working.
And but the question is, would be then, do the people who have those broken games from the regional level to a higher level, do the high school wrestlers who got away with being faster than everyone else while being a terrible wrestler, do they then become better coachable and good wrestlers when they move on to a better coach?
That entirely depends on the athlete. Because I knew, when I was an athlete, there were definitely coaches. I feel like in any sport at a youth level or an entry level, regional level, there are some dog shit coaches out there.
Of course.
Who teach stuff because, hey man, I've seen this work at competition, but they're talking about a really low level of competition.
Mm-hmm.
And it's it depends on the quality of the athlete, the quality of the coach they go to next, and then are they open to rebuilding their game? Because if you start out with a bad coach, you're going to have problems. And I don't think Rory necessarily started out with a bad coach.
No.
But there is that where it's just because some guy starts young and looks awesome young doesn't necessarily mean he's going to keep improving at that clip, which I think was one of your major points that I completely agree with, is you got to see how they look at the next jump of competition and the next jump of competition. Because a guy I would point out who struggled with this would be Michael MacDonald, who he still hasn't left his small camp, right?
Yeah, I don't think so. I'll check, but I'm pretty sure he's still at wherever he is. I don't even know the name of it off the top of my head. He's at Last Stand Fight Team is MacDonald's camp, which you wouldn't. There's nobody to even the next most notable guy is Angel Deanda on that team,
who's a phenomenal athlete and learned some good skills. I mean, is not a bad fighter, but man, there's clearly a disconnect when he got in there with with like really high level guys, there was a big skill gap when he got in there with Renan Barão, when he got in there with Uriah Faber, like big gap in skills. And obviously that's a couple years ago, but and if I remember correctly, he wasn't doing awesome against Brad Pickett before he got the submission.
No, I mean,
this fight's like 3 years ago, so I don't really remember it that clearly.
Well, I mean, he wasn't doing. Let's see, who did he fight last? He fought
Masanori Kanehara.
Masanori Kanehara. He was getting kind of worked over by Masanori.
He made that amazing backscape and slapped on a choke. Yeah, so
always gotten by on his sort of his great athleticism. And I mean, that's kind of the funky thing about MMA, especially. And this is why I'm saying, like, it really comes at the elite level, I think, more than anything else in MMA. And this is what makes it maybe a little harder than any other sport to, like, where that can be a problem more than almost any other sport. And I'm just speaking, I'm bullshitting, but whatever, just roll with it. Is that you can really generally get really, really far in MMA with a fundamentally broken game.
Yes, you can get further in MMA right now than you can in, say, boxing. If you have some shitty local boxing coach who like taught you some basics and you're pretty athletic, you're not going very far in boxing.
No.
There's so much pro boxing. There is so much pro boxing that the number of boxing events held and like the number of like fairly good athletes who were just like total cans in boxing is stunning.
Well, and it's also too that like we talked about there's a right way to do it. That for when in these competitions, because they tend to be much more narrow. Like there tends to be with boxing, you can't grab, you can't punch below the belt, you can't punch in the back of the head. All you can do is punch, and you've got this very like front target, I can stand in front of you and punch system. It's a lot harder to make up for a lack of technical skill
when you've narrowed the number of skills that you can employ.
Yeah.
That was actually just something I was listening to. I was listening to the Heavy Hands podcast, and they interviewed Demetrius Johnson, and he said MMA is the easiest sport in the world because you can pretty much do whatever you want. And this guy's better at this than me. Cool, I'm gonna switch to this. Where he said that like when you compete in one of those specific art styles, you are basically being narrowed into a very particular skill set, and it's really hard to make up for a skill deficit in that narrow of a skill set. And in MMA, you can make up for it. You can absolutely make up for it in being a better athlete and maybe a more relentless wrestler than the guy is, or something like that. And there's so many ways to win that it's easy to make up for the fact that maybe you can only win in one way.
Yeah, it's MMA, and then when you get to the elite level, like I say, there's this point where you're getting to like top 5, top 10 fighters, and suddenly that shit really matters. And for people like us, people who watch a lot of this sport, it's very often really difficult to understand how much that matters when you're watching this fighter on the way up. Like you watching somebody build their game and keep going forward. And it's like, no, they're winning. They're doing good. They're really a good, they really have everything they need to be a great fighter. And then suddenly they hit this wall, and it's suddenly like, wow, that wall is way bigger than I ever thought it could be.
Yeah.
I mean, to give like a really bad low level, but still functional example, because that's all I've got going for me right now, is like Cathal Pendred. A solid example of this, where he became Cage Warriors champ, and then he went off on like a 4 or 5 fight win streak in the UFC. I think it was just a 4 fight win streak to start his UFC career. And there were all these people in the technical side of things being like, this dude cannot do this. This is, he is really not good.
Yeah.
And then, you had him and people who were fans of his, however many of those there were. And they're like, no, look, he's winning. You don't know what you're talking about. This guy is a good fighter. He's winning fights, and he's winning in the UFC. And then suddenly he hit that wall where it was like, okay, now you're actually fighting people who are actually functionally better than you and bigger than you and stronger than you. And that wall was totally insurmountable.
Yeah, it's something that MMA fans, I feel like, are fairly familiar with, because there's usually the, like, I think of Conor McGregor, the chorus of like, well, what wrestler is he beaten? You know, like, you can't prove, no one believes you can wrestle until you've beaten someone who's a fairly good takedown artist. And I think that simplistic of a view is changing, seeing as how like everyone can defensively wrestle now and everyone can offensively wrestle to a certain degree at the higher levels of the sport. But this idea that, yeah, like there are younger fighters, and the younger fighters who start out in MMA young and maybe they're not getting the best instruction. The other part is that, do they really have a core game to fall back on? Like, do they have a solid set that, like, this is my core game that I am building out of? Or are they a collection of things like Michael MacDonald being another, like, going back to him, really powerful puncher, really offensive guard game, but, like, not really, like, there's not really a real connect between those two, because he's not so phenomenal of a guard player that people were, like, afraid to take him down. And I'm trying to think of, like, if he's off, like, he's a decent defensive wrestler, but he's not like a great, like
good defensive wrestler. He's a really good scrambler.
Yeah, he's like a really good explosion grappler, has a good guard, like, really loves the scramble, heavy-handed, but, like, the pieces don't really fit together. They're just, like, aspects of MMA he gravitated towards as he was training, but he never really, like, built his game around a core skill in this way that, like, a guy coming in from, you know, Stephen Thompson, like, coming in, all right, I have this really excellent kickboxing game, ranged kickboxing game. I am building my game around this.
Yeah, he's not going out there and trying to wrestle you much. He's developed a better wrestling game and a better scramble game and a takedown and takedown defense game that functions with his style. But everything that Stephen Thompson's doing in the cage is built around emphasizing the advantages of his range kickboxing. He's staying outside. He's luring you into counters. He's throwing lots of kicks. And I mean, in this fight, he was just throwing, lots of, not a lot of anything. But when he did throw, he was throwing some good, solid, straight shots and just keeping the fight out at range. And then, if it had to go into, if he felt like he needed to change something up, he could hit the occasional takedown. If he felt like he needed to, if you shoot in on him, he's developed good takedown defense. But those things aren't something that he's constantly relying on. He's relying on a core skill that he knows is going to be functionally much better than his opponents. Yeah,
and Rory's game is much more adaptive, I feel like, which is partially why you get these weird performances where just, like, nothing seems to happen. That's kind of how I feel like the Tyrone Woodley fight, the Robbie Lawler fight, he just wasn't able to, like, figure out.
Well, not the Robbie. Which Robbie Lawler?
The first Robbie Lawler fight.
Okay, yeah.
Like the Jake Ellenberger fight. Like,
the Jake Ellenberger fight, yeah.
Where, like, he didn't really seem to, like, find the adjustment that he needed to make. He's got I feel like he has a very reactive game most of the time. Whereas, like, maybe earlier in his career when he had, like, a firm, like, grappling advantage, he really liked to take guys down and beat them up. So I feel like Rory MacDonald's got, like, this reactive game, and then against Stephen Thompson, the first phase of what he wanted to do, the outside striking wasn't working. Then he got hurt, like, his nose got hurt, and then it became all right, I can't get hit in the face because my nose is broken and my face is turning to mush. And then it kind of became this, all right, what do I do now? With the occasional, like, I think the Imanari roll mixed in was purely to fuck with Thompson's head and make him think twice about that really bladed one leg in front stance. I think that was purely the purpose of the Imanari roll. If you hit it, awesome, you won. If not, it'll maybe make him think twice about standing in that stance when you get kind of close to him. But MacDonald couldn't make the adjustment and ended up not being able to push a pace on Thompson, and Thompson just took over that fight.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see going forward because it is, I mean, let me put it this way. I think Rory MacDonald can easily be a good elite or close to elite fighter for the next 4-ish years, 4 or 5 years.
I'm with that. I think and he'll hang around even after he start like the decline starts, and there's like a level of like a couple of guys that he in no way will beat.
Yep.
Which I don't think we're quite there yet.
It is really hard to imagine him fighting at an elite level much after the age of 30.
Yeah.
Like, it's hard to think like 6 years, 7 years from now that Rory MacDonald is going to be like either in the UFC or fighting at a high level wherever he is. Like, maybe even just in MMA. Like, we're seeing the damage stacking up now, and he's got years to go before he's in his 30s. And fighting is not kind. It's not a sport most people can do forever. And the people who have tended to do it for long periods of time have either, we've either found out later on that they've been taking PEDs, or we found out that they
destroyed their bodies.
Yeah, or they destroyed their bodies, or they took long stretches of time off, or they, went through long dominant periods of their career where they just did not get beat up much.
Yeah.
And these things are very rare. Like, I mean, the PEDs one is less rare. It seems like every fighter who started in the late 90s or early 2000s that is somehow still fighting has failed a drug test now at some point.
Yep. So
that part of it is much less of a mystery.
Or you get Robbie Lawler, who like just stopped sparring for years.
Yeah, exactly. So Rory Mac, like, it's really hard to come out of this loss for him and feel a sense of optimism. I think that's the big thing, is that it feels like a very, well, we saw this coming because he started in his teens and he's going to flame out before long kind of result.
Yeah.
Which is a shitty way to wrap up this UFC Ottawa card. But we're running out of time because you got other shit to do, and I want to dive in on the regional scene really quick and talk about a few guys there. Like I said, there are a ton of events. There are not a lot of specific big notable talents out there. Obviously, there's the Bellator card and Satoshi Ishii fighting. He's still, especially for a heavyweight, young in his career. And even though this fight's down at like 215, I've talked to him, and it's not like, oh, I'm planning to cut down to light heavyweight in the future. He was just saying, this is the lowest I can possibly get to agree to, or to get Rampage Jackson to agree to catch weight. So he's down at 215 for this, but he's still an interesting heavyweight of sorts. I've talked to him. He's a nice guy, but worth watching. Also on that Bellator card is Rashard Lovelace, who's got a really fun, funky striking game. I'm interested to see what he has. A few other fighters that might be interesting. Justin Lawrence versus Isao Kobayashi for the already kind of flamed out prospect fight of the night.
For the flamed out prospect title.
Yep.
Speaking of Victory FC.
Yeah. Also out there is Mike Rhodes is fighting, former UFC fighter, and Bruno Korea, both former UFC guys that got cut pretty early in their careers. A couple of people I'm really interested in, though. First of all is Luc Ngeleka, I'm going to say.
Yeah.
Who is fighting on SHC. He's a heavyweight.
Oh, is this the guy with the like ridiculous knockout?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And he's not a super skilled fighter. He's really young in his career, but the dude is just like totally a raw power fighter in the making. Really kind of reminds me of Derek Lewis.
Mm-hmm. Yes, that is actually that in the fight I saw. That is a very apt comparison.
Yeah, reminds me of Derek Lewis, and Derek Lewis is still not a technical marvel, but just learning how to be slightly patient has made Derek Lewis a borderline top 15, really dangerous heavyweight.
Yeah. Some other guys. Steven Jackson's MMA series. Steven Cervantes. Looks like a pretty well developed Winklejohn striker. Like has all the signs. Like prefers like an outside kicking game. Lashes one to the knee every so often, like that straight John Jones kick to the knee. Mixes in spinning stuff every so often. Pretty young in his career, 2 years in. Already looking like a fairly decent striker, so he might be interesting checking out. Curtis Millender is fighting on California Extreme, and he was a welterweight extra guy who got off the regional scene and had a rough time of it in Bellator. But looking to bounce back. And who else were we taking a look at?
I'm also interested in, there's a guy on this strike-off card, AHmet Kayretli, I want to say. I don't know. He's Turkish. Whatever. His nickname is the Turk. So, AHmet Kayretli, who I believe has a pretty good Muay Thai background and is kind of ventured over into MMA a bit, and I'm really interested to see what he can do. He looks like he's got, a good, powerful, tiny Muay Thai striker. So, and fighting on the American circuit now, like I've seen, I think I saw at least one fight of his in Thailand. So fighting over on the American circuit now, he's pretty likely to get noticed if he keeps running up wins. So he could be a fun action striker at a major show before long if he keeps that up. Also, Wagner Maia in Watch Out Combat series or Watch Out Combat show is he's kind of in the same boat as Luc Ngeleka, in that he's a light heavyweight, big, powerful as hell, really raw still, but he looks like he's really got a strong feel for chaining together different combinations. The kind of guy who will throw a couple hooks and an uppercut and a leg kick, and even if he's kind of winging some of it, it's all landing with a ton of power, and he's just got that kind of shoot a box attitude of just bull in there head first and wreck people. So at light heavyweight, it's always good to watch out for anyone like that because light heavyweight's a dead division and it needs all the talent it can get. So some of these guys get called up pretty early. I don't know if there's anyone else too much that I'm absolutely interested in. Like I say, I'll post a list as we always do along with the show that's got the names of everyone that we just kind of breezed over, even if we didn't talk about them or not. But people we noticed this week that might be worth a look at afterward. And on that note, I think we're going to wrap things up, get out of here. You can find Tom on Twitter at TP_Grant. You can find me on Twitter at TheZaneSimon. You can find both of us over at BloodyElbow.com. Give this video a like. That's a thumbs up. Subscribe to MMANation.com, DOTCOM over on YouTube. That gets you all the latest BE shows, interviews, analysis, videos, all that good stuff that we do. And we will be coming at you. I believe we've already had If I Did It. And I'll be doing a Bellator Dynamite Vivi tomorrow. So we'll be doing a much closer breakdown of that card. And then we'll be coming back with, we've already got Knuckle Up this week going too. So we'll be coming up with all these shows next week too. And we'll be starting to get ready for UFC 200 a little way out. I might do a random show on Brock Lesnar or something like that. We'll see. And thanks everyone for tuning in. We'll see you next time.